And here he is, Bryan Hymel. Hi, Bryan.
Hey, Manuel, how are you doing?
I'm good. So welcome to our little conversations. Bryan is a friend for many years and an amazing colleague. We have a very close friend in common with Jeffrey Van Eben, who was our agent for a while and who is now dealing with some severe health issues.
Yeah.
And we met, I think the first time we met was doing a recording together for Warner called
Yeah, I
Eric.
think we had one quick drink together at the Santa Fe bar.
Oh,
At the bar.
oh, you remember that? Okay.
Of course I do, yeah.
And so Bryan is an extraordinary tenor, extraordinary artist, and Bryan has sung in all the major opera houses in the world regularly, and beyond his artistry, vocally, what is exceptional is the way he can negotiate such a very high register with such power. When we did Heroic, for instance, I think you must have sung those 10 days more than 200 high Cs.
It was crazy, yes.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
and it was insane. And that recording got a lot of prizes. So you were born in New Orleans and you are now in New Orleans. So you're very faithful to New Orleans. Can you tell us a little, I've never been in New Orleans, but can you tell us a little about your upbringing and what brought you to music and then eventually to singing?
Sure. So where I went to school here, when you got to the fourth grade, that's when you could do any extracurricular activities. So I was very eagerly awaiting the opportunity to take piano lessons because that's what I really, really wanted to do first.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got my parents to buy me a keyboard and we set it up this summer before I was going to start my lessons. So I was just plunking out tunes and things like that, and then I wanted to join the band. I just love music. I mean, this is
were your parents musicians at all, or what made you want to have a piano? What is it?
You know, when we would go to church, I really perked up when the organ was playing, and where in our church you could actually go sit right next to the organist because the console was in the congregation. And so I would beg my parents to go sit over there. And so I would just sit there and watch the organist play. I mean, you could sit right next to him, watch his hands, watch the feet, watch the stops move, all this kind of stuff. And I just was transfixed with that. And it was that organist that I knew that I was going to start taking piano lessons with. And he's actually the godfather of our youngest daughter. We're still very close with Drew Montague. And he's still there and been there all throughout my musical upbringing. Yeah. So and then I wanted to play in the band, but I wanted to play saxophone, but we didn't have a saxophone. But my grandfather had played trumpet in the band, and so they were like, "Well, we have a trumpet. If you want to start that, you can do that." So that's what I did. So I went full force into the music when I was about 9 years old. So that's fourth grade here in America. And played trumpet in the band and took piano lessons. And then I remember we were playing one day outside the playground after school was over. And somebody ran out and said, "Oh, they're having tryouts for the choir." And I was like, "Oh, I'm not interested in that. That's not my thing."
Yeah.
And they were like, "Well, there's only like 3 guys and like 80 girls." And I was like, "Well, maybe I'll go and see what
that's about." Yeah.
And so I did, and I joined. I auditioned, and they took everybody, and so, and it was great. And I loved just being. What I loved about the singing part was being in a big group of people. I just really liked the same thing with band, getting together with a big group of people and making the music together.
Mm-hmm.
That was what was really fun because I had played sports before that. My dad played softball and baseball and stuff like that, and we did swim team and gymnastics and basketball and everything. But the music kind of got to me at a deeper level, and so that's what I did. And I did all that through grammar school, and then I went to high school. And then I got braces on my teeth, and so that put an end to the. Actually, I struggled through trying to play trumpet.
That put an end to the singing, the trumpet, or the girls?
The trumpet.
Or the trumpet only.
Definitely the trumpet, yeah. And so then I concentrated more on piano. And so then I went to an arts high school for piano as a piano performance major. And then I realized that I couldn't spend 8 hours in a practice room by myself. I just had too much social energy that I just wanted to go and work with people and stuff. And so then I ended up playing piano for choirs, and playing piano for like the musicals at our school. So I started music directing. Broadway style musical.
I did not know that. Oh.
So I played for like, I don't know, I mean, Ain't Misbehavin', Godspell, Anything Goes. I played actually piano for one performance of one run of Ain't Misbehavin', which is a crazy difficult piano part. And then I played trumpet for it again. So I've gotten to do, I mean, just lots and lots, and I mean, over 30 different things. And so when I was ready to go to college and university, that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a Broadway conductor because I love theater. I love the jazzy music. And I had done some things singing, but because my voice was always kind of like on the more mature side for my age, I always got cast as baritone characters because my voice was bigger than everybody else. But I was like, I can't sing that low. Like I remember I was doing Man of La Mancha, and they had me as the governor, and I'm like trying to sing all this stuff. And it's like, I can't do this. So anyway, it wasn't until I was auditioning for university that I auditioned mainly for piano and singing, but mainly singing just to see if I could get some extra scholarship money. And so I auditioned for Eastman, I auditioned for Loyola, and I auditioned for LSU. And then I got...
So at that point, you are what? You are in your 18, 19, 20, something like that?
Yeah.
And you still didn't know you had that amazing thing in your throat.
I knew that I could sing kind of high, but I just felt like I was screaming. Like I just was kind of like, it wasn't my choir voice. You know, it wasn't my choir voice, and I didn't know what to do with that voice. And I remember I had one specific voice lesson with Drew where we sang all the, you know, this is getting ready for the university auditions, like Sento nel cuore, but in the baritone, like in the medium high key. And I kind of was singing somewhere between my choir voice and a bit more of a soloist voice. And at the end of the lesson, I was like, listen, I just want to show you something that I can do. I'm not sure what to do with it. And so I sang a C scale from middle C to high C. And he was like, I see. Well, yeah, we definitely have to explore that other voice that you've kind of found, which I think I probably found it from, you know, hearing my grandfathers play Mario Lanza records. My mom's dad always played Mario Lanza. He was Italian, they're Italian family. And I remember it was because you come to me with, and it was like, you know, it's something like just a G at the end, which now I realize is not that high, but it seemed like the end of the world, you know, at that time. And I was like, oh, I can hit that note. And so anyway, so it was that point that when I did the college auditions, everyone was like, listen, you're obviously a really good musician. You spend a lot of time with piano and all this other kind of stuff. But we feel that your talent for singing is the least developed at this point, just because you haven't, you know, my voice changed late. I sang in boy choirs until I was almost 13. And so it changed late. And even at that, there was never a real dramatic shift. It was just very gradual that it kind of went down. I know you sang as a boy too, so I don't know. Your voice is much lower than mine though, right?
Well, I you know, I'm exactly the opposite of you. I always wanted to be a singer, and I became a conductor. And you know, so I'm fascinated by your story, because when I was a kid, I was screaming my head off all the tenors aria I could know. And
oh my God,
still to this day, I'm convinced it sounded very good, but I could not convince it. Well, it might have. What is, but let's go back to you. What is stunning to me is that for me, you know, there are so many different tenors, and there are some extraordinary tenors whose voice has been constructed painfully, artificially, and
Yeah.
so be it. The result is sometimes very valid, very excellent, very interesting. For
Yeah.
me, of course, your voice has been cured, matured, carved,
Yeah.
gained, but it's a very natural voice. That means when I hear you sound, these are your notes. Not only that
Yeah.
IG that maybe was difficult to hear, but that high
Right.
C, it's not fabricated. It's really coming from all of you. So how did you navigate this? And did you then build this up to probably gain that confidence with a very natural voice? Or is it a
Absolutely. I
natural
mean, if
voice?
you don't mind us getting in a little bit of technical talk
We
here.
want that.
Yeah, I think, okay, so my first voice teacher, who was a wonderful man who has since passed, Philip Frohnmeyer, who was at Loyola, which is where I ended up going for my undergrad here in New Orleans. He taught a very healthy kind of, what a lot of people start with, you know, forward, like very bright placement that.
When you say forward, you know, like in the mask and.
Very masky, very, right. Yeah, and it was great. And then I studied with him for about 6 years, and this is like, you know, when I was 19, I think, when I made it as a finalist to the Met competition, which was probably a little bit unfair because I just was too young. It was literally the second competition I ever entered, and because there are so many rounds, we thought, well, you know, you get a little bit of money at the district, you get a little bit of money. It was really about the exposure of singing in front of public and dealing with my nerves. And so none of us expected that I would kind of go so far in the competition circuit, but you know, it was what it was. The Metropolitan, after 6 years of studying with Phil, the Met, Galetha Nichols helped me to switch to a teacher from Juilliard who was Steve Smith. And he was a very good teacher, very much the opposite kind of technique from what Phil was teaching.
So not anymore projecting or too much in the front, like lightly, but grounding things more, or what?
Yeah, it was absolutely about grounding and not trying to like chase resonance, I guess is the best way to put it. He wanted it to be a more neutral position that didn't, you know, because a lot of times when we go for frontal masky singing, the sound, especially for tenors, can become nasal, right?
Right.
And it's not a very pleasant sound.
You feel the cartilage and the bone resonance. Yes.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so by going to Steve, I feel like I was able to kind of balance that out a little bit. And I studied with Steve for about 2.5 to 3 years while I was living in New York.
So that's a conductor question. By doing so, going more in the voce di petto, I guess, you know. Yeah. I mean, isn't the risk to lose the top?
Well, it's funny enough, by doing the forward placement, I started to lose my top. It started to cap off. I think because although it was still supported, you know, it's my understanding at this point in my voice that you cannot really put a voice forward without using the base of your tongue, right? Like if I go, questo quella per me perché sono I feel down here, although it's not pressing, there is a tension, right? There's a tightness that is there that I feel like, well, I know as I went higher and especially sang more and more. I remember I was working on the Bohème aria, which I have at this point sung for almost 20 years. And
always in the high tonality, I assume. Yes.
Yeah. Because I could never.
Like I'm not cheating like the other guys, you know.
That E flat on Your Belly, I was like, for a long time, it just didn't even come out right. So anyway, so I just knew that something wasn't quite right, and so and I would say that even at that point, I was overdoing the frontal place. So Steve was kind of the opposite. I did gain a lot of ease of singing, but I lost that brilliant squillo which Galetha had said that was kind of your calling card. That was your trademark. And that was what, you know, I think one of the natural just characteristics of my voice that made it stand out when I was young. So when I left Steve and went to Bill, it was kind of like my last ditch effort. I remember I was 27 years old. I had spent all my savings that I had made singing regionally. I mean, I sung Tamino in Grand Rapids and the Duke in Grand Rapids and Lucia in Birmingham and Don Ottavio in New Orleans, and made a little bit of money that I put in the bank to save for the only things I couldn't put on a credit card, right? So they paid my rent and they paid my voice lessons. And after 2.5 years, I was out of money and I had a lot of credit card debt. And I was like, I'm going to go back to New Orleans and be a church musician like I had been since I was in high school. And I'm going to pay off this debt. And I'm going to say I gave it a great shot. And that was it. Well, Gay Letha said, listen, I think you owe yourself one more shot. Let me write to Bill Schumann, who, of course, I had heard of because he was, one of the most famous New York teachers, specifically for tenors and sopranos, but really for everybody. And she's like,
and a voice doctor too, in some way.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And he's like, and she's like, he teaches at AVA in Philadelphia. If you get into the Academy of Vocal Arts, it's free tuition, so that will help you. You won't be at least incurring any more debt while you're doing it. And so we said, okay. And so Bill gave me a lesson, and he said, listen, I think that you're a great candidate for AVA. You're 27 years old. Your voice is mature enough. Your musicality is good enough. And the coaches and the language will get you, and the maestro will get you ready to see if you can really kind of do this, and you won't have lost very much. And so, so my parents took a second mortgage out on their house to help me make the move to Philadelphia, pay down the credit card debt, and do that. And if it wasn't for Gay Letha and Bill and my parents believing in me, I would just be doing church music here in New Orleans.
And maybe you would be, doing great job doing church music, and God works in mysterious ways, Yeah. But in hindsight, the world would have lost one of the most amazing tenors there is. And I'm just so much looking forward to hearing your voice on stage once we are out of the
thank you.
But tell me, what, in hindsight, do you think taking that time, going in different direction technically with different people, did that made you stronger technically as an artist? Or in hindsight would say, I lost some time. If I had my nephew or whoever coming to me, a young Bryan coming to me, I would tell him that's what you have to do.
Listen, so when I got to Bill for the first 6 months got me back just strictly on my nature, because I was so tied in knots that I didn't know where to do. I didn't even know how to sing an A vowel and know if it was going to be right or wrong. And so he said, listen, he gave me a whole new repertoire of arias and things that I did not know. So I had no habits. Right. And he said, just take a breath and sing, Bryan. Your instincts are so good, and you've just been a little bit confused on what to do. And so we did that. And so, in hindsight, for sure, every coach, every good conductor, every teacher that I've worked with, and I do believe that if you're going to go with a teacher, you should give them at least 2 years to understand what they're doing. I mean, you don't have, you can take a few lessons to figure it out, but once you have a good feeling, you should commit to giving that person.
Because the plant needs to grow. It's not going to be snapped like this. Yeah.
And the terminology, I mean, I know the terminology between languages. I know the terminology even between what the UK uses in America. You need some time to understand, forward can mean this, but it also can mean this. Back can mean neutral or woofy. So you just need that time. Now, I look at it as like, I had time with all these great teachers to explore all the different options. And I use a lot of those as different colors. I mean, that's how you find, I think, the different palettes that one can use, the Coupeau color for certain, really menacing, dark kinds of things. And it's been very interesting, and then led to the recording, a couple of years down the road. And I thought that I was so interested in and wanted to do that specifically, and was so glad that we got to that you were French and that you were a singer and that you understood all these things, because these old Dupré and Nourri, the guys who were really doing a lot of this high heroic French stuff. Nourri was more of a voix mix head tenor kind of guy. And Dupré went to, I'm sure he studied in France, but for whatever reason, he felt like that technique was not working. He went down to Italy, he studied there, he came back, and that's when we started, having
right. So for the people listening, our heroic recording was mainly French arias for a certain type of heroic tenors, who indeed sounded, with a strange combination of whammies and so on, which brings me to many questions before we go back to your development. Would you say that for all the reasons you have developed with the mask, the color, the resonances, your voice is at its best in the French repertoire? Or why is your voice, maybe another way to phrase it, why is your voice working so well with the French repertoire? And do you think the Italian repertoire with a French color, or do you change really the color consciously when you sing German or Italian repertoire? By the way, I don't think you sing German repertoire.
I not very much. I mean, I do, and like I would say that one Tamino, Max and Freischütz, and Das Lied von der Erde. At this point, those are really the only German things that I've spent time working on. All great pieces. But to address your question about the languages and do I think them differently, I do think that each language has its own, the style. I just think of it as part of the style. I don't really think of it as a difference in placement. I feel like, for instance, with German, because the consonants are so plosive itself, it spits the voice out in a very
I don't want to give you names, but I know some tenors, quite important tenors, who also actually are conductors, who sing German beautifully, but they sing it with Italian or Spanish technique.
Yeah, absolutely. I do know, and I
don't
do
want to comment on
I
that.
know like German singers who sing Italian almost like they're singing it as if it were German lieder.
But they don't even say, well, that's not the way I sing, and just so be it. You have to accept it. I have heard of you in Italian. Your Butterfly is absolutely stunning, beautiful. Your Bohème is beautiful. So what you're saying is that it's just the tension and release and the natural colors of the language that leads the vocal position, correct?
That's what I think. And I think that, one interesting point about the difference, say, between French and Italian, if I don't speak about the language, I'm speaking just about the way that the voices were kind of the idea of the voice. For instance, you can look at French and Italian roles. Well, if you take Vespri Siciliani, for instance, so Verdi wrote it in French for French singers. The tessitura is much higher. Same with Don Carlo, that Verdi wrote. And I think because of the way that the tenors in France went more from a head tone voix mixy kind of thing down, he was able to write music where the tessitura just sat higher, maybe like a whole step. For instance, in Verdi's, the difference between Don Carlo in the 5-act French version and the 5-act Italian version, the 4-act Italian version, which of course there's lots of differences, but the one that I think it demonstrates what I'm trying to say the best is that the Io la vidi is a whole step lower than the version in French, which is in C, his first aria.
I've not done the version in French, which is, I think, still the best version, but it's less done. So I didn't even realize that, but what you say makes a lot. Have you done both?
It's also twice as long, right?
Yeah, I know. Have you done both?
No, but I've done the 5-act Italian and I've learned 4-act Italian. And even in that, in the 5-act Italian, the first aria is in C. In the second one, it's in B flat. And so, and I think that just speaks that the difference of the way of singing, specifically for tenors, the Italian is much more G to G with your occasional high note, or even A flat to A flat with your occasional high note, specifically for like Donizetti and Verdi, unless we're talking about the really crazy high specialized Donizetti stuff, not l'Élysée, not, even Favorite, which he wrote in French first. It's still that has, I think, a C sharp in it, but we're not in the like crazy Donizetti and Bellini territory of D's, E flats, E naturals, and F's,
Right.
And I think that those guys were definitely doing a kind of mix.
So let's go back to your development. Bill helped you find your voice, connect your various techniques.
Yes.
That took like somehow 3 years at AVA, something like that.
Yeah. So I did 3 years at AVA, and while I was there, I mean, we didn't. Although we looked, it was kind of that aria from Guillaume Tell, the Asile d'Héritière, that made that switch and showed me that kind of music. I understood that I could do that, but Puritani, for instance, that had the D's, was like just like a half step too high, the tessitura for that for me. So while I was at AVA, although I did audition for AVA with the Pirata aria, the first one that has the two D's and the aria Cabaletta, and I auditioned. What else did I do? I think I did Mes Amis too. I mean, it was definitely like I'm going for the high.
Well, yeah.
But while I was there, I sang all kinds of stuff. I mean, that's the only place that I sang Max and Der Freischütz, which is low. I mean, that's practically, and that was just kind of a, we need somebody to sing it. You're the closest we've got, so we do it. And although maybe it's never, a role I'm not going to do or haven't done or might not ever do again, I still learned a lot. I mean, just about how to negotiate things that might not be perfect, because when you're in school, your teacher says, oh, you're the perfect this, that, and that. You get out of school and you're like, well, I have an offer to sing this. I mean, my first offer, I think, out of AVA, or while I was still at AVA, was The Prince in Rusalka. And I was like, okay, which is tricky, right? Because it's either cast really heavy or really light. But having sung it a number of times, it's a heavy role, for sure. It has the high C at the end, but in general, that is full. The orchestra is huge. I remember when I did it at Covent Garden, the foreign princess was Petra Lang, who sings Isolde. And I mean, like it, and Camila Nealon Saris was the Rusalka, and she sings a lot of Wagner and Strauss. I mean, it is and Yannick was conducting. That was the first or the second time I had worked with him. And I was like, whoa, okay, so maybe this is not perfect, but it was my debut at Wexford, which was considered my European debut. From that, I got to go to Greece. I got to go to Bordeaux to sing Tosca the first time. I got lots of other offers. And then from the shows that I did in Greece, Peter Katsina asked me to come to Covent Garden because Elaine Padmore, who was the director of opera at that time, heard me at Wexford and said, okay, we'd like you to come and do Carmen. We are going to do Rusalka. And we'd like you to cover Werther. And while we're at it, how about look at this piece we've never heard of, or that nobody had heard of at that time, really, Robert le Diable, and see what you think about that. And so I was like, okay, so I went from having one job to 3 jobs to 9 jobs probably in about 6 to 9 months. And it all stemmed from a job that I would say even to this day is not the perfect role for me, much more now than it was at that point. But we do have to kind of split the difference and sometimes take an opportunity that's not perfect in order to just get the momentum to get you something that you would be better. And I had a lot.
What's tricky in our career is that, as you know, you get labeled very quickly. People are ready to give you a first chance, but it's more difficult if you are not known and you are just a young singer. Once they have an opinion, it's difficult. So you got, in the right spot, and I'm sure you did fantastically well, and that's because you were ready for that.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I would say is that I worked my ass off, and I continue to do that. And if I hadn't done that, I would have never been able to learn the Czech, because I remember learning the Czech on this really long role. It was endless. I had no frame of reference. But
so let's go to this. How do you learn a role like that, or an Italian role or a French role? What's your process? Do you coach with people? I mean, you can play for yourself. Do you listen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have found that, like, for me at this point, and I think it's a little bit different for everybody, because you have to play to your strengths and your weaknesses. For instance, the hardest part for me is memorizing the text. The music learning part it takes almost no time. For me to do, and there are a couple of things that I've learned, right? That I tend to lose the most detail between, like, while I'm memorizing, right? Like, if I'm not super careful about what's a double, is that a 16th note or an 8th note? Is there a rest there or is there not? So I now I'll go through the score. Obviously, the first thing that I do, and I don't translate everything now, because especially in French and Italian, where I've done a lot,
yeah.
I look through it and I'm like, oh, I don't know what that word means, and then I will write that in there. But certainly at the beginning, I was doing. I mean, I remember the first when I did Così the first time, I didn't know about the Nico Costel books, and I translated Ferrando with a dictionary and a 500.
Well, but then now you remember it more than anybody else, probably.
Oh yeah, so yeah, that's true. It also took about 4 weeks.
right. So do you start with the text and then you learn the notes on the piano and then you put the two together? Do you go to a coach? I
usually go to a coach once I have, what I would say is like an 80% grasp of it, because I don't want to, listen, it's a luxury. Like when I was at AVA or any school for that matter, to have a coach to kind of like learn, but I just can't, like, I just feel bad asking, Daniel Orlando or Laurent Philippe or somebody else to be like, can you help me just like learn through, let's just plunk through this. You know what I mean? So now I get it to where, I'm going to prepare it as well as I can prepare, so that when I bring it to them, they feel like I've already put a lot of work in, and that is like, okay, well, now that he's done that, I'm going to give him this layer to kind of put on it. And Laurent and I worked on all those French roles like forever. I mean, like Robert le Diable, and the whole of the French recording. I mean, like that we kind of sat down and just learned through it together.
Well, you arrived to that recording amazingly prepared, and I think that's the only way you can do such recordings. And it was, I mean, in hindsight, we were crazy to want to record so many of these arias in a short period of time, and it was stressful. I mean, and Bill was there with us, but this is one of the most beautiful recordings I've made.
Oh, thank you, Emmanuel. Yeah. I just didn't know how many times you were going to have to redo things. I didn't know how many times we would have to redo things. And it's not, I just figured, I don't know, in my ignorance, that we just show up there, you and I would go through it, we play it, we maybe do it twice. But, this music is not known to the orchestra, and the Prague Philharmonia is amazing. The PKK it's amazing orchestra. They do a lot of recordings, as their music director. But this stuff was tough. I remember that O Paradis, the O Paradis sortir. We must have did that 12 times just so that me and the oboist, or the English one of them, would be, because we were unison.
Right.
And she was behind me, so she couldn't hear me.
Right.
And I remember you were like, okay, guys, I know you can do this. Just look at each other and do it. And I turned around and we sang it like perfectly the first time.
Right.
But when you're trying, when you know that the light's on and the recording is running and you got to do it.
Right.
It's incredibly mentally taxing, more than it is vocally.
Right. I can tell you by any standards, actually, we recorded that thing very fast.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I mean, and I mean, I guess, I don't know if you could even speak after the recording for a few days, but
I remember I was supposed to do a Verdi Requiem with Yannick, and I remember making that call, and he was like, I could have told you this wasn't going to happen if I knew you were doing your recording there, because it's just...
he told you that, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's one of these things. I remember at that time, like, for me, things had just started clicking. I mean, this is, and so there's so many.
I can tell you, very often nowadays, because of that time constraint and the difficulty of having that, everybody wants it to really line up, and you don't want to line up artificially, because you could also do that.
Right. Exactly.
And I have done, I won't say what with whom and when, but I've done other recordings where a good part of the recording, it's like, I can't do this anymore. And then you record with the orchestra, you do 2 or 3 takes, and then in another studio, the singer sings over it. I'm sorry, you hear that in the end.
Yeah.
That's not the real thing.
Absolutely. And, and I mean, like, it
was stressful, but it was, I mean, somehow the stress is also part of the beauty
of the fun.
And because there is so much tension, and it's the beauty. And for instance, one of the things I prefer in that recording is Nature Immense, which we both feel the same way, which is really large. And I feel very strongly about this because there is now it's played all the time, like almost doppio tempo. And Berlioz, who is not the easiest person, writes specifically in the score, you have to subdivide. These should not be too fast. And even if Berlioz had not written this, you see in some of the double basses part, you have rhythms that cannot be done if you are too fast. And I think the idea is that nature is larger than humans. Nature is larger than any melody, and the voice is just floating over this and stretched to impossible limits. And you were doing this and you were feeling this in an amazing way. And again, this works only because you win a certain type of fight, with what's possible and what is not possible. Talking of tension, fight, struggle, and then victory. What do you do when you have, usually I ask this question to the sopranis about the tenor. What do you do when you have a colleague on stage who is not necessarily being totally cooperative? Or a conductor that doesn't understand that your voice, although you would be happy to sing it maybe at another tempo, you definitely vocally need this or that.
Well, that is a can of worms right there. Fortunately,
Please open it.
I usually get along with my fellow singers. I'm pretty easygoing, especially with like as far as the stage business. The only thing that kind of gets me a little bit frustrated is when someone does absolutely something drastically different every time we do the scene. Like I remember there was a colleague who I had who she was like, she just didn't, it was a revival. There wasn't a lot of strict, you have to go here, you have to do this stuff. And she just took that and ran with it. And so she would just saunter in, do whatever she felt like. And it was, I can't say the show, but it was a trio that we were singing. And it's very clear, like when I should hear what she's saying, when I shouldn't hear what she's saying. And we just needed to at least like time a couple of looks to make sure we connected, and then you could go back into your own thing. And I remember it was after the rehearsal, and I said, listen, I don't care what you do, just tell me what you're going to do so that I'm not looking at you at the wrong time, and that we're doing this. And that was when she said, well, I do it differently every time. I was like, well, then why are we even rehearsing? We all know the music. We all know this. Why don't we just show up and do the opening night and leave it at that? And she got all flustered. And I was like, I'm not the only one. We're all trying. Why are we here if we're not going to agree upon, what we're going to do? And that was one of the only times I've had a problem, and it wasn't even a problem. It just was kind of like, it's hard with the schedule. Sometimes people just come in and they're just tired. And they just don't have the energy to give. There've been, maybe one time, maybe two tops, where I was doing a show where me and the conductor just didn't jive. And very often it's just a personality conflict more than it's a specific, I need more time on this note. And I don't know. I don't know why that happens, but it definitely does happen. And in the end, I just left the production because it was too difficult for me. And I just thought, if I cannot trust that the conductor is going to help me out in something that is so difficult, I'm going to end up looking bad.
Right.
And that was really hard for me to do. And I talked a lot with the Opera House before I ended up doing it. But in the end, I just felt like I can't sing 10 performances of this 5-act, eternally long season opening role and have it be possible that Bryan Hymel can't make it to the end of the show because he killed me in the first 3 acts, which the power that a conductor has if they want. If they want to wield it in a way that is not helpful, they can be really not helpful. Right. And that's just, that's nothing new. And I think, I've worked with that conductor before. We've had dinner and drinks and had a great time. But on that particular project, for whatever reason, it wasn't going so easily. So, you move on, and I'd work with him again. I'd just be like, listen, I'm not going to do something that's so difficult if I don't know all on the same page. And the director, I mean, there's such egos that I just didn't anticipate. I was under the impression that everybody was going to come. We were going to perform this beautiful music, whichever it is, and just be happy to have a job as a musician, because that's where I came from. And then I walk in there and I realize there's lots of other things like egos and who's got this and power. And I was like, you know, I don't play that game, because it's honestly, it's a game that very few singers could win at this point if your stage director or your conductor is against you, because they can just make it hell. They just literally can.
But Bryan, I mean, anybody who knows you, you are an amazing colleague. You're really very committed to what you do. You're very well prepared, and I hear only, you know, wonderful things about you as a colleague and staff.
Well, I mean, even still, there are times where it happens. So it's just
stuff happens, and you're right. Sometimes it's just, you just don't know why. You know, the air temperatures start changing. Do you like, you know, talking of rehearsals? You have worked in some German houses. You have worked in a lot in Covent Garden. You worked in the US. How do you feel about this? Do you like to be challenged by a stage director? Do you like to rehearse 8 weeks a bohème, or do you like to jump in with half a rehearsal?
You know, I see the pros and cons of each, really. I mean, I've had to do a lot of them, and I think you just look at it. I love to rehearse as long as we're getting something done. You know, not everybody loves to rehearse. And some people, and again, I don't think that's because I know that all the musicians that have made it to this level have made it there and stayed there because they're hard work. But again, like I said, sometimes you get into production where you're just so tired, like you just, the mental, you know, some of the most fun rehearsal periods I've had have been on new productions where you are in there for 8 weeks.
Yes.
And you're you know, like
building something. Yeah.
When we did Vep Sicilienne in Munich, not the first time we did it, we had a great time. Because Antu, who was the director, he's a theater guy, but he loves opera, and you know, and he got it. And so we would sit around the table, you know, and kind of say our texts and stuff, and then we move, and then we go to the piano, and then we'd sing it, including in the dramatic intent we had talked about sitting around the table. And I had done Le Vep a good amount of times at that point. I did at least 3 times at Covent Garden, and I loved the Herrheim production that we did there, and kind of thought, well, in a piece that's tricky, this is really one of the only ways I could see it work. And then after our work in Munich, I was like, this is just as good. It's good, it's different, but very interesting, very more avant-garde in Munich as one would expect. But I love the work that we did on that. And of course, it's also the team, you know, if you've got, you know, something like that, Le Vep has 4 real principal main characters. And if you've got everybody there committed to really doing something fun, and everybody's being a team player along with the director and the conductor, I don't think there's more fun to be had in making opera than that.
Absolutely. You know? And the performance benefits from this, and I think the audience sees that this has been carved and worked together in amazing ways.
Then there is, like, you know, there's the excitement of having to jump into something like Vienna, like even my Met debut for Les Troyens was the same thing, like with Susan and all these other guys. I had no stage rehearsal. I had no music rehearsal. Like 45 minutes with Fabio Luisi right before we went on. And we did it. And there's an exhilaration that comes with that you're just like, you know what? I'm just going to go with this. I trust Susan that she could not have been more helpful.
Oh, yes.
And she's just that kind of person, you know? But we had a great time, and it's fun when you can like rely on other people. And then, you know, and also on like some of these bel canto things, I remember when I sang with Eglise Gutierrez, we were doing Puritani, and I was like, man, she is singing the hell out of this. That inspires you to like, I'm going to do even better than I can do.
Right.
You know? And it's not about an ego thing of who's being the best. It's just like, wow, we've all been in those situations where somebody walks in and their game is so high, you're like, okay, this is going to be fun.
It's inspiring. Literally.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I find some houses like this. I mean, that's every time I'm in Covent Garden or the Met, you are just brought to your best. You know, some people can get crushed by this because it's a lot of
Sure.
too. But
Sure.
I think if you feel it's getting well, then you want it to be really that extraordinary, that little word class that maybe you wouldn't necessarily find somewhere else.
And I just have to give a shout out to like management at Covent Garden, at the Met, and Munich for that matter. That they are so helpful in such a sincere way. You know, I've been at Covent Garden, especially for longer, like with more new productions, so I spend more time there. And like those guys just believe, they know that
well, your success is their success, so they understood.
Yeah.
You
But
know?
they're so nice about it. I mean,
Yeah.
they're almost like unmeasurably nice in London.
Yeah.
The Met is a little bit more like you get the respect that you get back the respect that you're given, which I mean I think that that's great. And I really love that. And I think that just like it just puts you in a nice place. There are some places where it's so sterile that you feel like nobody cares whether you do a good job or not. They're just there getting the job done.
And there are even worse places, some of them in Italy, where you enter and it's more like, how is he going to fail today? You know, I mean,
unfortunately, there's a little bit of that.
Some of that, and you need to work very hard to just do your best and be carried. Repertoire. So you know, Les Troyens is totally yours. I guess Robert le Diable should be yours.
Well, no, I don't. I although I love it, maybe a concert performance.
Right.
It's funny because a lot of times people think high French rep, and kind of lump it all together. But for me, Les Troyens and like Robert and Les Vep and Guillaume Tell, for me that stuff is like all the same. It's all the same, similar orchestration, with Robert being the heaviest one of those. Troyen is, I mean, you know, although we've had Gedda sing it, we've also had Vickers sing it. We've had,
Renaudot sang it, who was, you know, this multi-purpose voice.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, so I mean, it's I do love Les Troyens, and I know there's a production out there that we're talking about, hoping to get it done. It's going to be a big deal. You know, but the other stuff, no, my voice is, and also, okay, so like after I sang the Les Vep in London the last time, then we did the Cavalleria and the Pagliacci right there. And so I was supposed to do the Cavalleria, guy got sick for the Pagliacci, and so, you know, I straight up offered, and they were like, well, if you want to. I was like, well, you know what, I remember talking to Daniel Oren, I was like, there's nobody here for the Sitzprobe, so give me a score and I'll sing along. And we did, and it was fine. And although Pagliacci is certainly a monster role, it's only 23 minutes long. And if you take out Vesti la Giubba, it's only 20 minutes long. Mm-hmm. Now it's very 20 minutes of intense singing. But now, having done them and done both of them, I can tell you that Cavalleria is certainly heavier than Pagliacci is. Pagliacci is lower, but Cavalleria, like the doubling of the strings in that scene with the Tu qui Santuzza, I mean, when they're just playing away, because Elena and I had sung that together on a concert, on a tour of concerts that we did in Vienna, and I was like, "Ooh, this is real singing," you know. And the thing is that after I learned that, I realized in singing the Pagliacci, because it is lower, that I had almost been artificially keeping my voice higher to stay able to sing that repertoire. And so in some ways, more than a handful of people have told me that Cavalleria and Pagliacci is the best thing they've ever seen me do.
So are you saying that although you still want to sing Les Troyens, and I think nobody can sing Les Troyens like you would like to go to a repertoire that is like Cavalleria and Pagliacci?
I mean, we're certainly exploring more of the Italian repertoire, like Tosca. Well, like also too, the Don Carlo that I did at Covent Garden was, again, they thought one of the best things I had done there. And so again, it's just, and now that I'm 40, I'll be 41 by the end of the summer. my voice has, and also I've realized in like I was saying, what I had to do to kind of artificially keep my voice up that high, if I relax that part, then my speaking voice is now where it is now, which I feel is much more supported. It's not like when I sang before, I wasn't supporting, but there was still a bit of tension that support was fighting against. Whereas now, it's funny, like I love, this kind of quarantine has been really difficult, but it's given me so much time to think about singing and about music and about life and in general. I every once in a while, there are 2 books that I pick up on vacation to read. And one of them is Caruso and Tetrazzini's On the Art of Singing, which I believe is still free on the iTunes bookstore. And although obviously the Caruso part is very interesting, I think Tetrazzini's part is so basic. And like she says at the beginning, I'm picking the most straightforward language to get these points across, because I feel like people overcomplicate the idea of what singing is. So that is a great one that I always read. And then the other one that's a little bit trickier and more controversial is Great Singers on Great Singing. And I just kind of make it through. There are just 3 or 4 page articles, and everybody's in there, and they say, one says I sing in the mask, and Corelli says I never think about the mask, and Pavarotti says I do this, and it's fascinating. But
and probably the overthinking, like you said earlier, is the worst enemy in this.
And so I just realized that okay, low larynx. So people talk about, pretty much everybody agrees that you should have a low larynx, right? I think, but there are different ways to lower it. I mean, there are people who like go ahead and press it down with their tongue. That gives them a very like that kind of like bitey sound, but that will only last so long, no matter who who you are. But Corelli, I want to go maybe a little bit, but certainly Corelli and some of these other guys, they were not pressing it down. They just figured out how to take in that air and get it to go down, and then just like send the air through it. Because Callas too, I mean, like she just, if you listen so closely to these recordings of Callas and Tebaldi and Nielsen and all these old guys, they can go from the smallest piano to the biggest forte in one phrase, without any interruption or covering or opening or this or that. And I'm like, the only way one can do that is if your throat is completely out of the way. And I remember, I think it was Regine Crespin's article in Great Singers on Grace. And also, I don't just read the tenors, I read everybody's, because I think they all have something interesting to say. She was saying your throat should feel like nothing is going on. And I was like, that can't be true. How is that the case? And so I just was like, well, what do I have to do? How can I find a way to really feel like my throat is absolutely passive? Like it's not overly open. It's not overly this. And what would happen? And I just started doing 5-note scales on an ah, and going up and going through the passaggio and saying, if I don't try to cover this or don't try to modify this vowel this way, what happens in my throat? And all of a sudden I realized that the throat somehow just reacts. If you don't tell it to do something, it will find a way to do what it does. Now, sure, you have to already like know how to like not be holding with your jaw, your tongue. But once you've gotten all that stuff out of the way, it does amazing things as long as you stay on the air like one bow, not like a boat skipping across, because so many singers support just on the vowel, and they like either try to do the fastest consonant you can, or something else, and you end up getting a what the AVA maestro will call a chewing gum legato, which sounds like when you're just doing this, but you're not really on the air. And that for me has been a game changer, because now, like, I just realized when I can relax it down, I speak like this, and I've been speaking, I'm not screaming, but I mean, I'm speaking like at least an hour.
And I wanted, this is very, because we have not spoken in a long time, and I was wondering if it's my computer, but I just feel your voice, your speaking voice is in a slightly different position. And
I can go back and put it, this is how I spoke forever and ever and ever and ever. And lots of people would say, oh my God, if you just sing in the same place where you speak, you're going to be golden. So I did that. But I realized that it's like, it's a little bit pressed. Whereas now if I take the pressure off of it and like or any like press or any whatever, I can
Right.
sing.
So in a way, COVID has forced you or helped you to conceptualize some of those things and to see how to relax a certain amount of things. And I think that's quite.
Yeah, that's my silver lining for all this.
The silver lining. Bryan, I think we are at the end of our conversation, unfortunately, but I can't tell you how impatient I am to be with you. And to make music. You are an extraordinary artist and a wonderful, wonderful singer. And I hope we'll do Cavalleria, Troyen, Paya.
I hope we can still do our Aida that we have there in Dallas at some point.
Yes, we have an Aida on the block. I would like to do that lead actually with you too. You know.
You know what? I'm ready to go. That one I've done in the smaller chamber version, and I was talking about doing it with one of the bigger European orchestras.
You can do it in both. I mean, you know, the small version sometimes is louder. That's always a thing. But the small version is done with a trumpet too. You know.
Yeah, it's like 13 instruments. A lot of it's taken by the piano, and then they
right.
small string. But no, I would love to do that.
Different. There is the Schoenberg arrangement, but there are other ones.
That's the one.
You know what? Let's decide which one we want to do, and then we do it together.
I would love to do it.
Looking forward to seeing you. Stay safe in beautiful New Orleans. Don't be too hot, and I see you soon.
All right. Thank you, Emmanuel.
Thank you.
Bye.